According to the latest reports from the Frontline, soldiers from the 66th Mechanized Brigade attached to the Ukrainian army successfully destroyed Russian tanks. Following this successful attack by the Mechanized Brigade, the Petrus Brigade, which is the most successful unit in the Frontline area, launched a major operation. The Petrus Brigade is currently the most technologically advanced unit in the Ukrainian army. This unit has attracted the attention of the Russian media by using specially developed weapons and equipment. Ukrainians have also started destroying Russian tanks as if popping corn. The soldiers of the 66th Separate Mechanized Brigade successfully engaged and destroyed at least 5 Russian tanks. It was revealed that the armor developed by the Russians to protect their tanks was completely ineffective. The 66th Brigade has participated in numerous battles since the beginning of the war and is known for being well-trained and experienced. Ukrainian forces deployed in the frontline area have now become the most experienced soldiers in terms of warfare. They have gained significant experience in both urban and forested combat situations. So far, they have achieved considerable success against the world's second most powerful army. The brigade is recognized for its proficient use of anti-tank missiles, and its soldiers have the capability to execute seemingly impossible shots to destroy enemy vehicles. The attack on the Russian tanks was a carefully planned operation. Reconnaissance units attached to the brigade monitored the location where Russian tanks were constantly resupplying the brigade. Soldiers using unmanned aerial vehicles conducted continuous flights in the area to discover Russian positions. During these flights, all the armored vehicles hidden in the forested area were identified. The Russian tanks were individually destroyed using the anti-tank missile system. It was revealed that 5 Russian tanks were destroyed in this specific attack. However, the attack that the Russian media talked about also revealed the helplessness of the Russian army. Thanks to the state-of-the-art equipment used by the guards of the Petrus Brigade, it has become evident how much technology has advanced by deploying unmanned aerial vehicles equipped with the world's most expensive lenses. The Petrus Brigade gained a significant advantage in pinpointing the whereabouts of the Russians. The cutting-edge unmanned aerial vehicle executed an impressive operation, destroying millions of dollars worth of Russian equipment. A Russian howitzer concealed in a forested area near the lake was successfully destroyed by the Ukrainian forces using this unmanned aerial vehicle equipped with thermal camera systems. This incident serves as an example that the front line is considerably further back. Ukrainians are also highly proficient in neutralizing standalone armored vehicles. Ukrainian UAVs infiltrating behind Russian positions can carry out unexpected attacks. Russian artillery systems are positioned approximately 20 to 30 kilometers behind the front line, making it extremely challenging to target them. In fact, the Russian army hides its artillery units in a wooded area to avoid detection from the air. Nonetheless, Ukraine's most advanced drones can even detect well-camouflaged armored vehicles. Therefore, the Ukrainians launched a major raid behind Russian positions, this time showcasing Ukraine's growing strength. The guards of the Petrus Brigade can effectively eliminate enemy targets with modern and efficient weapon systems, achieving a 100% success rate. Unmanned aerial vehicles, thermal cameras, and other advanced technological equipment have significantly enhanced the Ukrainian army's capabilities in detecting, tracking, and destroying the enemy. The recent operation that destroyed the howitzer also reveals the extensive distribution of Russian equipment. The rugged terrain in the eastern frontline area initially provided an advantageous situation for the Russians. However, looking at the recent operations, it is evident that the Ukrainian army has become significantly stronger thanks to the equipment and aid provided by its allies. Some military experts even state that the Ukrainian army is currently the world's third most powerful. Of course, this is debatable, but it is essential to remember that over 20 countries have provided assistance to the Ukrainian army. As a result, the Russian media has begun closely examining the state-of-the-art systems used by the Ukrainian army. Despite the development of special cage armor systems for Russian tanks to prevent aerial attacks, the Ukrainians are successfully destroying Russian tanks. Russian defense industry firms have even developed special camouflage to avoid the detection of Russian armored vehicles. However, the thermal camera-equipped drones used by the Ukrainians have caused great distress for the Russians. After starting to utilize cutting-edge weapon systems, the Ukrainians have launched highly successful raids into areas controlled by the Russian army. According to the reports, Ukrainian defenders have advanced up to 2 kilometers into the depths of the Russian defense on the Berdyansk front. Valery Churkin, the spokesperson for the Joint Press Center of the Tavria Defense Forces, stated, "On the Tavria front, the defense forces are systematically pushing the Russians out of their positions and continuing to move forward. The most significant progress on the Berdyansk front has been recorded with an advancement of approximately 2 kilometers into the depths of the Russians. We are consolidating our position on the borders under Russian control, conducting aerial reconnaissance of the region, inflicting damage on Russian targets with artillery fire, engaging in reciprocal artillery clashes, and conducting mine clearance. Russia is fiercely resisting, but we are systematically applying pressure on specific areas of the front, advancing, and destroying the combat potential of Russian forces." As stated by the Ukrainian spokesperson, according to the spokesperson, Russian losses have significantly increased in the past day. Ukrainian authorities announced that the Russian army lost 36 pieces of equipment in just one day. Furthermore, Ukrainian artillery brigades can now target Russian artillery units. 3 Ukrainian artillery brigades successfully hit Russian Federation's artillery systems. The 3 Ukrainian artillery brigades demonstrated the destruction of scattered Russian artillery positions in various directions. The Russian army came under attack from both rockets and artillery units. Western weapons received by Ukraine from its allies were used to eliminate enemy artillery units. Thus, in the direction of Bakhmut, an air reconnaissance unit of the 43rd Artillery Brigade discovered the positions of Russian artillery units. The American system was used for attacks on Russian positions during the engagement. The artillery hit the Tu-S-1 Gvozdika 122mm towed howitzers, the Tu-S-5 Jets 152mm self-propelled howitzers, and the BM-21 Grad. Additionally, in the direction of Bakhmut, the 45th Artillery Brigade destroyed the Tu-S-1 Gvozdika self-propelled howitzers. Any crisis along the Russian border is advantageous for Ukraine. Ukraine liberated territory that had been occupied by the enemy since 2014 by launching a barrage of offensive operations amid disarray behind enemy lines after a well-planned offensive. Ukrainian defense officials have affirmed that their forces have recaptured territory near Krasnohorivka, southwest of Donetsk, in the extreme east of the country. The reported victory occurred as Ukraine continued to exploit the disarray in Russia caused by Yevgeny Prigozhin's troops abandoning their positions and marching on Moscow. Since launching its much-anticipated counteroffensive at the beginning of June, the Ukraine has succeeded in reclaiming several villages that had fallen into Russian hands over the course of several weeks. Ukrainian forces have continued their counterattack operations with gradual but consistent tactical advancement. While Moscow attempts to safeguard vital supply routes, the failure of the now depleted Russian army continues to have a global impact. Russian soldiers are fleeing the front line in eastern Ukraine, according to the Ukrainian military, as Kiev's counterattack acquires momentum. According to the operational update provided by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Russian personnel have withdrawn from the front lines in the contested eastern Luhansk region. The desertion of Russian forces in Ukraine has been documented after issuing a warning. The British Ministry of Defense stated in November 2022 that Kremlin generals may have authorized the use of weapons against deserters. According to the Ukrainian General Staff, a party of fleeing Russian soldiers was discovered in the Ukrainian village of Novorossiysk. This organization is classified as mobilized forces. The Ukraine is not the only entity searching for fleeing Russians. It was asserted that the Russian National Guard also participated in the search operations for the fleeing soldiers. It appears that the practice of shooting deserters is indicative of the poor quality, low morale, and lack of discipline within the Russian military. Previously, images circulating on the internet suggested that Russian personnel fired upon their retreating soldiers. Obviously, the Kiev forces are pleased with the current situation. Therefore, in which direction is the Ukrainian counterattack advancing, and what is the Ukraine's strike tactic? Before we continue, I would like to remind you once more, if you oppose the invasion of Ukraine and wish to support my team's efforts, you can like our video, leave a comment, and press the incredibly grateful button below. The Deputy Minister of Defense of Ukraine boasted in a statement that Kiev's troops had virtually achieved tactical success in all areas and directions where they advanced in the south. He even wrote on Telegram it's time to pay back and added, "We are stronger than ever before." The British Ministry of Defence reported a few days ago that the invading forces had regrouped in recent days and conducted significant offensive operations in the country's east and south. The most recent update from UK Defence Intelligence indicates that the invaders have redefined and refined their tactics. Prior to launching attacks on the three main fronts in southern and eastern Ukraine, the announcement of new operations appeared to have precipitated the Ukrainian counteroffensive. Ever since Yevgeny Prigozhin announced the attempted rebellion, a video released today demonstrates that Ukrainian artillery destroyed a convoy of Russian military supply vehicles in the Zaporizhzhia region. Moreover, explosions and airstrikes were reported in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, which are located deep within the Russian-occupied territory. Last night, there were at least 10 attacks on Bakhmut. The Russian Ministry of Defense has verified that the Ukrainian military has continued to attempt attacks over the past 24 hours. Several villages surrounding the city of Bakhmut, where there has been a violent stalemate for months, were attacked. The Russian assault on Bakhmut was primarily conducted by mercenaries from the Wagner Group. Ukrainian forces have captured 1 kilometer of Russian trenches in the Bakhmut territory, according to video footage. Yesterday, Ukraine's Deputy Minister of Defense, Hanna Miller, announced that Eastern troops simultaneously launched operations in multiple directions to Orikhovo, Vasilivka, Bakhmut, Bohdonivka, Yagodny, Cliffjumper, and Kazhumyaka. Progress has been made in all areas, he said. Additionally, according to the Ukrainian General Staff, Ukraine has made gains in western Zaporizhzhia, south of Orikhiv. Russian forces continued limited ground assaults northwest of Svadov in response to alleged ongoing Ukrainian attacks along the Kremenna-Svadov front line. According to the Ukrainian General Staff, Russian forces attempted abortive offensive operations near Berestov, Kharkiv Oblast. According to the Russian Ministry of Defense, Russian forces successfully repelled for Ukrainian attacks near Karmazynov, Yakovlevka, and Dybrova. According to Russian sources, Ukrainian forces struck Luhansk city with Storm Shadow cruise missiles. Geolocated images depict a smoke plume surrounding Luhansk. Rodion Miroshnik, a former official of the Luhansk People's Republic, alleged that Russian air defense systems were active in the region. In addition, the update stated Ukrainian forces are utilizing the experience gained during the first 2 weeks of the counteroffensive to develop tactics to attack well-prepared, deep Russian defenses. The Ukrainian military is making consistent but gradual tactical progress in key regions. In reality, Russian forces had made significant efforts for an assault around Kremenna, a city in the Luhansk region of eastern Ukraine. Valery Churkin, a spokesperson for the Tavria Defense Forces Press Center, stated that several positions were seized near Krasnohorivka last week as the result of a well-planned attack. There was artillery and heavy equipment support as well as action imitations. In addition, they cleansed certain areas of mines. Moreover, the Ukrainian Air Force has lately dealt heavy damage to the Russian bases in Luhansk. The Ukrainian Air Force's Su-24 bomber flew low and launched a missile attack on the Luhansk Teplovoz facilities used by Russian forces as a command and maintenance center for military equipment during the Su-24 bomber's mission. A total of 4 explosions were detected. According to locals, the explosions were so loud that they were overpowering. The most striking aspect of the assault, however, was that the Su-24 bomber fired Storm Shadow missiles manufactured in the United Kingdom at the Luhansk Teplovoz facility. The Ukrainian pilot had hit the objective from a distance of 12 miles. Shortly thereafter, a massive conflagration broke out at the Luhansk Teplovoz facility, which had been struck by Stormy Shadow missiles. The Russian base in Luhansk was the greatest Russian army headquarters in Ukraine. When Ukrainian warplanes using Stormy Shadow detonate the Russian rear front headquarters at a distance of 250 kilometers, all operations of the Russian army in the east will be disrupted. The Ukrainian forces destroyed the Russian home base with incredible tactics, as depicted in arresting images. It was known that significant Russian military equipment resided at this facility. Presumably, the Ukrainian Su-24 pilot also fired accurate rounds at the facility's ammunition storage area. In 2015, Russian forces looted the former locomotive factory Luhansk Teplovoz before converting it into a Russian military command center and equipment maintenance center. Since then, Russian forces have utilized the facility as a command center rather than a repair area for equipment. It is believed that senior Russian commanders may have been killed as a result of the Ukrainian Air Force's Stormy Shadow missile attack using Su-24 fighter jets. The Russian military was unable to intervene promptly following this attack. This was due to the lack of assault brigades in the vicinity of the Russian army facility at Luhansk-Teplivaz. In these regions, the Russian army consisted primarily of volunteer divisions of amateurs in a similar fashion. The Ukrainian military has volunteer units on the front lines in and around Luhansk. In certain areas of Luhansk, however, only intelligence operations are conducted by volunteer Ukrainian units. In other words, the Ukrainian volunteer units may have provided crucial information for the attack on Luhansk-Teplivaz by the Ukrainian Air Force. Uncertain are the source of the facility's strategic coordinates and the number of Russian personnel housed there. But the Ukrainian Air Force's attack on Luhansk-Teplivaz deprived the Russians of a vital military resource and command center. The inability of Russian personnel to repair their guns and tanks could provide Ukraine with a decisive advantage as it attempts to recapture Luhansk. In addition, it appears that this attack will increase the burden on the Ukrainians in Luhansk. If you recall, Ukrainian forces recently conducted a major offensive operation in Markivka and captured a significant portion of this settlement. The Ukrainians desire to establish an attack corridor between Donetsk and Luhansk. Following this operation, the Ukrainian army, which after Bakhmut was able to advance towards the Luhansk line, is now carrying out their plans by attacking the Luhansk-Teplivaz facility. Because the Russians lack a regular and robust military unit capable of launching a counterattack in these regions, the Russian military element closest to the installation is the 1st Guards Tank Army. In close proximity to this facility is the 993rd Anti-Aircraft Battalion of Putin's army. However, neither Russian unit is in a position to intervene. So what progress have the Ukrainian forces made on all fronts in the past 20 days? Let's evaluate the legendary tactics of Valery Zaluzhnyi, the architect of the Ukrainian victory and the chief of staff of the Ukrainian armed forces, and the consequences of his success. The tactics chosen by the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces, Valery Zaluzhnyi, are pulling the Russian invading troops into the ambush one by one. Military experts said that Zaluzhnyi chose the right and effective counterattack tactics. The tactics Zaluzhnyi chose for the offensive were clearly very effective in the field of operations. Ukrainian forces launched flanking attacks to cordon off, destroy or capture the Russians' first line of defense. The armed forces of Ukraine provokes the Russians to such a move in order to destroy them with the help of artillery on the move. The Russian invaders are trying to lure the Ukrainian armed forces to places that are more difficult for them because it is easier for them to procure equipment. That's why the Ukrainian armed forces works near Orikhiv, where the Ukrainian logistics is the shortest route, and the Russians have to transport their heavy vehicles from Rostov for a few days. The Russians are trying to pull the Ukrainian armed forces towards the east, Donetsk and Luhansk. There is the shortest way to supply from Russia, in particular to the Luhansk front, which is only a few tens of kilometers from Zaluzhnyi. As for the Bakhmut direction there, as expected, Prigozhin set a trap for the Russian troops. This is 100% losing direction for the Russians in the north of Bakhmut. The armed forces of Ukraine take the occupied territories, as in the south of Ukraine. Sooner or later, the Russians will have to leave because they will be surrounded. After suffering heavy losses, Russia urgently changed its tactics in Zaporizhia. It turned out that the invaders were faced with a lack of artillery. The Russian army is suffering disastrous artillery losses, losing several hundred barrels each month. Even after the Ukrainian attacks, such high casualty rates forced Russia to switch to more costly and dangerous tactics, such as using helicopters, which the Russians are trying to compensate for their heavy artillery losses. However, this tactic of the Russians seems to risk turning into a serious problem for Moscow in a short time. In the last 2 months, the shortage of artillery has reached critical dimensions, especially on the Russian Federation side. The Russian command does not have time to compensate for the loss of artillery, even by replacing the old Soviet howitzers. We see how the Russian occupying army began to drive more attack helicopters to the south and use them as artillery. This forces Russian helicopters to operate in areas where there are potential risks. such as being hit by air defense systems or entering the territory of a mobile group with man-pads. The Russians are suffering a significant loss of their helicopters. In early June, Ukrainian troops stepped up offensive operations in the Zaporizhzhia region, while the Ukrainian armed forces managed to liberate 8 settlements in the Zaporizhzhia and Donetsk regions. It also continues to advance in the direction of Bakhmut, while our Ukrainian forces continue their attacks and achieve success in the Zaporizhzhia region. They also carry out attacks against the invaders in the Luhansk region. It seems that the Russian invaders concentrated their main efforts on defense, trying to block the advance of the Ukrainian troops. However, the invaders are also using the reserves to recapture their lost position. An explosion occurred at night near the temporarily occupied city of Berdyansk in the Zaporizhzhia region. Petro Andriushenko, advisor to the mayor of Mariupol, announced that at 1:40 am, near Berdyansk, in the village of Herzov in the Mariupol district, a loud explosion that can be heard even 50 kilometers away. Local residents noted that the occupiers' base on the territory of the Rosa Recreation Center was attacked, followed by a fierce fire that lasted more than an hour. After the explosion at the airbase where the invading Russian army is located, many ambulances and firefighters were sent to the region. The fire that broke out after the explosion at the airbase is being dealt with. The head of the military administration of the city of Berdyansk, Victoria Galatzine, noted that all first aid teams in the city were directed to the airbase. Although the mayor of the city, Ivan Fedorov, stated that the air defense was successful, the black smoke and ambulance traffic around Melitopol indicate otherwise. On the other hand, Ukrainian General Staff spokesperson Andriy Kovalyev stated that his army strengthened the positions they took under their control on the southern front. In a written statement from the social media account of the Military Press Center of the Ministry of Defense, Kovalyev stated that the Ukrainian army continues its offensive operations in the Melitopol and Berdyansk directions, stating that the Ukrainian troops achieved partial success in the Danilov-Korobotino-Malatakmik-Verbovka-Vilna-Polom-Okharovka directions. Kovalyev said our soldiers are strengthening the positions they control. Kovalyev noted that the main efforts of the Russians are focused on defense, preventing the advance of the Ukrainian army using the reserves and retaking the lost positions, suggesting that the Ukrainian forces continue to stop the Russian advance in the east. Kovalyev stated that fierce clashes continue, especially in the forested areas of Yakovlivka and Serebryansk in the direction of Lyman. The officer of the Armed Forces of Ukraine spoke about the importance of the liberated bridgehead in the Pyatakotki region. The Armed Forces of Ukraine liberated 8 settlements in the south of Ukraine, including the settlement of Pyatakotki Zaporizhzhia region. This is a strategically important settlement, a fortress on the first line of Russian defense. The liberation of Pyatakotki is an important step towards the collapse of the southern invaders' defenses because the village of Pyatakotki serves an important function for the Russians. He noted that the armed forces of Ukraine achieved great results. Russia had high hopes from Pyatakotki because this is the key to Vasilivka, another strategic point of the invaders. Russian invaders placed large warehouses there. Pyatakotki is strategically located to Melitopol, the largest Russian military base in the temporarily occupied region of southern Ukraine. For the Russians, losing Melitopol means destroying all their defense systems. So what kind of effort did the Russian army make in the face of this situation? Before continuing our video, I would like to remind you again, if you are against the invasion of Ukraine and want to support our work with my team, you can like our video, comment, and hit the super thanks button below. The Russian army immediately tried to cordon off the deteriorated position after the explosions, after suffering heavy losses. Russia urgently changed its tactics in Zaporizhzhia. It turned out that the invaders were faced with a lack of artillery. The Russian army is suffering disastrous artillery losses, losing several hundred barrels each month. Even after the few attacks, such high casualty rates forced Russia to switch to more costly and dangerous tactics, such as using helicopters, which the Russians are trying to compensate for their heavy artillery losses. However, this tactic of the Russians seems to risk turning into a serious problem for Moscow in a short time. In the last 2 months, the shortage of artillery has reached critical dimensions, especially on the Russian Federation side. The Russian command does not have time to compensate for the loss of artillery, even by replacing the old Soviet howitzers. We see how the Russian occupying army began to drive more attack helicopters to the south and used them as artillery. This forces Russian helicopters to work as close as possible to the area where there are potential risks, such as being hit by air defense systems or entering the territory of a mobile group with manpads. At this point, Russia has revealed that it has suffered a significant loss of military power, including most of its most modern equipment due to the Ukraine war. Ukraine, which greatly benefited from Soviet-era weapons stocks, increased its combat capabilities by initiating a transformation in its army with the supply of ground weapons from Western countries. So can we call this offensive of the Ukrainian forces the main initiative? The CW states that the counterattack will likely not unfold as a single major operation. It is estimated that in many places it will likely consist of many attempts of varying size and intensity over the weeks. One of the reasons Ukraine has been successful in this war is its flexibility. The important thing here is who makes the adjustments the fastest.